Hey guys, this is Tauna. Today we're going to be doing my top 10 Commander Precons for August, essentially, of 2024. I usually do this updated with each kind of new set that comes out to remove some of the previous ones and kind of add in new ones that are quite powerful or quite interesting or quite strong. So before we get started, these are all very subjective and are my opinions. Some are based off of strength, while others are just based off of fun. Generally, all of them will want some upgrades unless they're competing against other precons, and even then they may need some touch-ups depending on which precon you're kind of looking at here. Generally, most precons post about 2022, like the start of 2022, in my opinion, are decently good, although some will need more upgrades than others. I try and keep the list up to date and exclude precons that are harder to find or are going to cost you your firstborn if you do. Hopefully you guys like the new kind of way I'm presenting it as well. Let me know if you enjoy that or whatever. And make sure you subscribe, share the video around and all that kind of stuff too. So the first one here we're looking at is Blame Game. So this is based around you making your friends hit each other, not just by forcing them to either, by giving them value if they do. So, you know, stuff like Nelly Borka here. She does it. We'll talk about her in a sec, but it also has some other actual win cons for goading decks too, which is unusual. You know, before this, there wasn't a huge amount of win cons for goading decks besides hoping that your friends kind of wiped each other out. But there's actually a win con in here for goading decks where you get to take control of stuff. There's some amazing reprints in here as well as some really strong cards. So speaking of Nelly being the face commander, and I'm going to show you guys the face commander for each of these because that's kind of where the base is mostly kind of based around, like the deck's mostly based around. So she makes it so that whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to one or more of your opponents, you and that person get to draw a card. So that's what I'm talking about, like encouraging people to go hit their friends, not because, you know, they're forced to, but because you really want them to, and they want to get card draw too. Trouble in Pairs is one of the strongest cards within here. The art, you know, ignore the art because it turns out that the person did some butchering with it and stuff, but just overall that card is very strong. Will get you a lot of card draw as well as, you know, making it so that people can't take a whole bunch of extra turns and stuff, which is really cool. All right, next up we've got the Family Matters one. So this is from the most recent Bloomburrow set. It makes use of the offspring mechanic to create a lot of little dudes, and therefore you get huge value from strong ETB effects. So anything entering, because of the fact you're going to essentially clone it, make a baby of it, then you get that ETB twice. It's a very good go wide deck that is relatively simple to play. There's an insane amount of ways you can upgrade this deck as well to make it stronger and more complicated and stuff, but overall the kind of base deck's really nice. However, in the actual base deck, I do think the secondary commander is a much better commander for it pre-upgrading. So having a look, so this is Zinnia, who's the face commander there. He is based around having a whole bunch of creatures that have 1 power, and then also giving all your creatures offspring 2. So when a creature comes in, you can pay 2, and it's going to create a 1/1 copy of that. So for an example of what this deck kind of does, this Agate Instigator is one of the cards within it. It makes it so that whenever a creature enters, you get to deal 1 damage to each opponent. And there's a lot of very similar effects and, you know, token creation and some good kind of ETBs, like when something comes in, do something, and then you get to do that more because of Zinnia. All right, we've got the Mutant Menace. So this is from the Fallout Universes Beyond. This is based around the rad counter mechanic. So it makes it so that people mill their decks on their turn and also deals damage to them, as well as +1/+1 counters. And there's a lot of stuff around +1/+1 counters. So you're going to be milling your opponents and getting value from doing that, whether it's stuff like Wise Mothman, who buffs up your creatures based on the stuff that's milled, or, you know, enabling you to also be able to steal things. I put still here, I meant steal things that get milled. There's also just a lot of generic support for counters and proliferating as well in here. So, for example, the Wise Mothman here, which is the face commander, whenever you mill, whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on some creatures. And then whenever he attacks, he gives out those rad counters, which make people mill. And for example of, you know, what I was talking about with the counters and the rad counters and stuff, the Vexing Radgull here makes it so that you proliferate or you apply rad counters to people, which is really interesting. Right, next up we've got is the Quick Draw. So this is a spell slinger deck based around playing a lot of instants and sorcery cards and then getting benefits from your creatures to do so. So, there's like create some minions if you do that, or, draw some cards, or do, copy it. Lots of great stuff. There is a lot of Izzet spell slinger staples in here. So red, blue staple spell slinger cards. And there's a lot of ways to cast lots of cards in a turn as well. So having a look, Stella Lee is the face commander here, and she goes infinite with a ham sandwich. You could play so many different cards to make her essentially allow you to have an infinitely strong turn, which can then most likely, if you've got the right cards out, be able to win you the game pretty easily. So because of the fact that she copies a target spell, you can tap her to do that, and then there's cards that allow you to untap your creatures. So spell like instants or sorcerers that allow you to untap. So you just keep doing that, tapping and untapping, and therefore you build up however many casts spells you've cast, and then boom, now you get to do some really big stuff. It's also got some protection because of the fact that you aren't going to have a huge amount of creatures out because you're mostly casting instants and sorceries. It's got like propaganda in here to help you protect your board and protect yourself too. Right, next up, we've got the Paradox Power one. So this is from the Universes Beyond Doctor Who. So it's all based around Doctor Who characters. And this one here plays around exile. So you're going to be exiling cards, and then you're going to be getting huge payoffs for that. There's a lot of different payoffs, and even if you don't want to build a Doctor Who based deck, you can take the cards from this and put them in with other characters from the actual Magic, or even some of the Fallout stuff. You can combine everything together and build some really interesting decks. But this deck out the box is really nice too. So because of the companion mechanic, you can essentially choose the Doctor that you want to play as, and then a companion that has Doctor's companion alongside them. So there's a lot of different combinations for commanders that you can use there with varying levels of viability and stuff, though some of them won't necessarily work with the actual Precon due to like color. So if you take the 13th Doctor and then you use a green companion with her, unfortunately you can't play any of the red cards that are in the deck, or anything that has red in it. So for an example, the 13th Doctor here, she makes it so whenever you cast a card from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter onto a target creature. So while it is mostly exile, there are other ways to be able to do this. So for example, if you cast a card from your graveyard, or from the top of your library, or from exile, then she also untaps each creature you control with a counter on it at the beginning of your end step too. For an example of like a payoff for casting something outside of your hand, the Flaming Tyrannosaurus is an option here where it deals 3 damage to a target and puts a +1/+1 counter on it when you do that. It can grow really, really big, and then when it dies, it deals damage to each opponent equal to its power. So if you've got it up to like, a 10/10, then all of a sudden it's dealing 10 damage to each person if it dies. So you got to encourage people not to kill it, and then also encourage people to eventually kill it. Right, the Peace Offering one is a group hug deck. So this is probably one of the more complicated decks that I've got on here, which I'll explain in a second. But it is a group hug deck. Essentially, you're going to go friendly with everyone. You're going to be giving a whole bunch of card draw out, mostly other nice stuff as well. And then at the end there, you stab them all in the back and you win. So you're going to be giving people friendly stuff. It's mostly cute creatures, so you can see here, Mrs. Bumbleflower as the face commander here, and a lot of kind of critters from Bloomburrow. But overall, there's so many different ways you can upgrade this, whether you want to keep the cute creatures theme or if you want to go different directions. But as I said, this is a little bit more of a difficult deck compared to the other ones that I've got in here, mostly because it requires you to politic, which, if you don't know what that is, essentially you're going to be making deals with people and being like, hey, I'll give you a card if you don't come attack me, or I'm happy to buff up your creature, but if you don't, please don't swing it at me or something. Generally, in Commander, you want to politic a fair bit, but this deck kind of takes it to the next level, as well as the fact that people can betray those choices, in which case everyone generally goes and attacks them, or it's just not as fun if people start going back on promises. So a couple of the different cards in here. Miss Bumbleflower, as I said, for the face commander here, makes it so you give an opponent a card draw, you get to buff up a creature, and then you get to draw cards depending on how many spells you've cast. If you cast, 2 spells per turn, you get to do that. As for like how to actually win with this deck, because obviously if you're going around handing out friendly stuff to everyone, you're not necessarily going to win, right? This is essentially these ones. So there's 20-toed toad is one of them, but there's other win cons in here. This one here allows you to win the game if you have 20 or more cards in hand or 20 or more counters on it. So you've got a lot of different ways that you can win with this card, but then there's other win cons in there as well that you can potentially use later on. So Deep Clue Sea is very similar to that in regards to card draw, but it's just you drawing cards. It's very heavy on card draw, getting advantage from drawing cards. So some of the cards are like, if you draw 2 cards in your turn, do this. You create a lot of clue tokens, which you can then pay and then crack them to draw more cards as well. The secondary mechanic is really based on tokens, so there's a lot of generic kind of stapley token-based cards in there, so double your tokens or create different tokens and stuff too. So from here, Morska's the face commander. As you can see, she's about investigating, which is creating clues. And then when you draw 2 or more cards, do this. And then Koma's an example of like a generic kind of token-y based card. You get to create a serpent token, and then you get to sack that serpent token for different things. All right, the tricky terrain one, this was from Modern Horizons 3. You're going to be playing a lot of lands, whether it's, your land for turn or additional lands on your turn, or, using ramp spells and stuff along those lines. You're going to be getting a lot of lands out, and then you get to turn them into different types of lands and then get huge value from that. So there's a lot of ramp in it. Where you can expect to get lots of lands out to make people think you're going crazy because you've got 20 lands out on turn 5. There's a bunch of landfall stuff as well, so getting value from playing more lands or getting more lands onto the battlefield, and some really, really great reprinted lands in this deck too. So Queen Oma here makes it so that you're going to turn all of those lands into other types of lands, as well as your creatures as well. And say, for example, Scoot Swarm is an example for a landfall card. So when a land enters, create some tokens and stuff. All right, the Explorers of the Deep one here is Merfolk Tribal. So it is going to be about when making a lot of Merfolk and then buffing all those Merfolk up. So all of those, every combat you get to buff them all up, and a lot of ramp as well from exploring, which is, when you explore, you look at the top card. If it's a land, it goes into your hand. If it's not, you get to choose if you put it into the graveyard or on the top of your deck, and then put a +1/+1 to stuff. And it also has some synergies around +1/+1 counters onto your creatures. So Huckval here is like the main engine, getting all of your Merfolk to explore each combat and then getting more lands out. And then Ripples of Potential is an example of a proliferate card and kind of taking advantage of cards that have counters on them. All right, next up we have the Graveyard Overdrive deck, and this one is from Modern Horizons 3 as well. This, like, the basic precon is very just classic Jund good stuff. So like old school kind of Jund. It plays rather well and rather aggressively. You're self-milling yourself to get things into your graveyard, and then that's going to buff up your creatures, as well as with the face commander that brings some stuff back onto the battlefield. It's got small Lagoif Tribal, which is like a very minor kind of creature type, but it's not the main focus of the deck, but it can be transformed into kind of focusing on that. Secondary commander is much better pre-upgrade as well, in my opinion. Quorum does a lot more for the deck than Dissa does until you go and upgrade it. So this is like the 2 different commanders there. Dissa here does a fair bit of stuff, like, she brings back your Lagoifs onto the battlefield and then creates Tarmogoyf tokens. However, there's not all that many Lagoifs into the deck originally, so you're kind of just creating a whole bunch of Tarmogoyfs. Meanwhile, I think Quorum just does a lot more. You can cast stuff from your graveyard that's been put into there from this turn, as well as, you know, when he attacks, you get to mill something, and he gets buffed based on however many things, the greatest power of things within your graveyard too. So, you know, he just overall does better for the base kind of precon, but this is really great, and you can easily turn the deck really well into a Lagoif kind of tribal deck, or, you know, just kind of move, even if you add like one or two more Lagoifs, I think that she's better. But there's a lot of kind of great stuff in this deck overall for like a graveyard kind of deck. All right, so now these ones are some extras. So these are like precons that are decently good and definitely good options, but I'll talk as to why. So first of all, theft. So the reason I've got theft in here is because theft is a great way for you to punch up on other people. So if someone else has invested a lot more into their deck, you don't need to punch up, like you don't need to invest quite as much in these decks to be able to enjoy them, because of the fact that you're going to be stealing cards from them. So you can steal their really good cards and get them out onto the battlefield and do some really great stuff from that, and overall just kind of do a really fun kind of deck with these and kind of play against people who might have been able to, you know, be playing for longer or stuff. We've got also these two here, the Velociraptor deck and the Eldrazi Incursion. These two are really strong, like decently strong out of the bat, can be upgraded to be even stronger really easily, but they are either expensive for you to be able to get, or they are rarer to be able to find. I think the Velociraptor one's going pretty heavily, like pretty high up over here in Australia at the moment. The Eldrazi Incursion only just came out, but people love Eldrazi, so it's really hard to find at a decent kind of price. You're more likely to be able to find that one at least, and, you know, Eldrazi overall are very fun, but you're very, like, you know, these ones here you could potentially be paying a premium for. And these two here are just two that have really amazing reprints. They are decent decks by themselves, but they are just, you know, they got really decent kind of reprints or new cards. Strong, decent reprints or strong, decent new cards. So that's Extra from Exile and Revenant Recon. Both, you know, Revenant Recon based around resurrecting characters, bringing them back from your graveyard and stuff, as well as surveilling. So like looking at the top card of your library, either put it into your graveyard or put it back on top. And then Exit from Exile is pretty obvious. It's just playing a lot of cards from Exile, but both have really strong kind of cards for their things. But that's it for today, guys. Make sure you guys subscribe, share the video around, like, all that kind of stuff, and let me know down in the comments if you guys agree, disagree with my choices and stuff. I hope you guys had a wonderful day, and goodbye.